I'm here. Good morning. Morning, everybody. Second one of these TAC resolutions we're discussing this morning. This morning's one around rational design. It's a term that gets tossed around quite regularly, especially when someone's already in trouble. But let's have a quick look at what was discussed and what was proposed for the following problem. We looked at this list last time round. All of these things are going to have the same format. It's basically down to seeing what the problem statement was, what was required from TAC, or what was the resolution required from TAC, the reference documents used, and standards, sorry, to be used to get to that, and then the reasoning around those documents. Very important to note, or to put a note down somewhere, that when you see one of these things here, it is a panel of 6 or 7 individuals that sat down, reasoned around this, sent emails up and down, basically negotiated to get to a point where if we do get to a resolution, that resolution is actually defendable should there be any hassles. So let's have a look at this problem statement. Various instances are being reported where a plumber is required to do installation work according to a design on plans or specifications which conflict with the requirements of national standards and regulations. What should a plumber do in this situation? And it has been proposed that the plumber do the work only after informing the engineer of the deviations. Is this correct? So let's have a look at what the requirement was. Can a plumber be allowed to do a water supply or drainage installation in accordance with a rational design without verifying that it complies with mandatory national standards and regulations? Should a plumber be required to evaluate a rational design and inform the engineer of any discrepancies regarding the mandatory standards and regulations? And are there any deviations that could apply? If I could just pause on point 2 for a second. You'll find that most engineers, or most competent engineers, would be able to work out or do calculations on water to the last drop. Could be on any subject, or the point is that they're not a plumber. The standards and the regulations that we look at is something completely different to what they study and what they apply in their everyday trade. So please note, this is not a bashing an engineer or an architect or whatever. This is something that we need to consider when you do bigger jobs, or when you do more complex dwellings, or there's a triple-story house that needs plumbing done or whatever. Bear in mind that the engineer and the architect studied in a completely different field than what you did. So sometimes we just need to touch base and make people aware of what's actually happening. So when it comes to reference documents and standards, we're going to go to the National Building Regulations, Part A, P, W, and XA from the one document, and then we look at 10252 Part 1, Part 2, 10254, and 10106 briefly. Briefly, we're going to be looking at them. When we look at Part A of the application of the National Building Regulations, it says that the requirements of the National Building Regulations shall be complied with by adhering to the requirements of all prescriptive regulations and satisfying all functional regulations by adopting building solutions that comply, with the requirements of the relevant part of 10400. So you can, in any of the above ways, you can actually just say that whatever's being done comes straight from the book, and this is how we get to it, and that's what was done. So the other option, or the next option, is reliably demonstrating or predicting with certainty that, to the satisfaction of the local authority, that an adopted building solution has an equivalent or superior performance to a solution that complies with the requirements of that relevant part of 10400. We all hear the term, or we've all heard it before, that a rational design needs to be equal or better. Sorry, I'm pointing at myself here. There we go. Equal or better than the actual standard. You can't go be worse off. So that rational design, the engineer will get appointed on a Form 2, submitted to the local authority, and then this being the first part of what was done beforehand, not once the job has turned out to be something no one can sign off, you run to an engineer type of thing. Not going to worry about the definition, but basically architect, engineer, natural science or geologist like we know them, there's a requirement for all of these guys that if they are registered in that category, they can do these designs and assessments. I'd like to point out point 3, or have a look at point 3, an approved competent person who satisfies the requirements of sub-regulation 1 we've just read in terms of sub-regulation 1B2 in respect of a system, in other words something, drainage, water, fire, whatever system, measure that was put in place, facility, parameter, or installations. And here comes the crunch. Shall inspect and certify upon completion in accordance with the requirements of A19 the construction, erection, or installation thereof. As far as the local authority is concerned, that is basically a Form 4. He signs a document to say that the system or the whole design, that rational design that he did, has been inspected, and he'll certify upon completion that it actually complies with the requirements of what he designed. So it's not for the plumber to get involved with that or at that stage. Important to note as well, while we're in that part A, that when a building plan is submitted, you have got 3 options as far as drainage is concerned, bearing in mind that water comes from 10252 part 1. So as far as the building regulations are concerned, the architect or the competent person submitting the plans have got 3 options. When you submit, you tick the box that says yes, and you tick the one that says it's in accordance with the detailed requirements of 10400 Part P. In other words, everything that is in Part P as we know it and we're supposed to apply, that design is in accordance with all the detailed requirements. So you tick that box, everybody's happy. The next option he's got is to say that his whole design of his building is based on it's the subject of a rational design or a rational assessment, or both for that matter. In other words, he couldn't get it to work according to 10400 Part P. He needed some gimmicks, or he needed some relaxation of distances or sizes or whatever, and then he'll tick the box that says yes, and he'll tick that box there. The last one, the Agreement certificate, that is for stuff that is not on, or there's no national standard for that, so it's like specialized, or, and even with that, when you tick that box there, that means that if you're using a product with an Agreement certificate, not only do you have to use that system or that product as it was tested, but in the same breath, some of these even go further to say that you have to have been trained by that manufacturer or supplier or whatever to actually apply that, and any deviation from that original approval that was granted on that certificate would make that application null and void. So it's not straightforward, but basically those are the 3 options that you're looking at of satisfying the regulations. Then we quickly dip into 10400 Part P, and that tells you very clearly that a competent person sanitation, in other words, the one that will sort out your drainage hassles, is registered in terms of the Engineering Profession Act as either a professional engineer or a engineering technologist. And he has a tertiary, or she has a tertiary qualification, degree or diploma in either civil or mechanical engineering, and is generally recognized as or can furnish acceptable proof of having the necessary experience and training to undertake rational assessments or rational designs in the field of sanitation. So when you look at 10400 Part P, you'll notice there's no architect, there's no QS, there's no project manager, there's no client, there's no one else deemed competent other than an engineer, professional engineer, or an engineering technologist that can do that type of design. And for the couple of guys, or the guys that haven't had a look at the drainage presentations net, a rational assessment is an assessment by a competent person of the adequacy of the performance of a solution in relation to requirements, including as necessary a process, calculation, consideration of accepted analytic principles based on a combination of deductions from available info, research, data, testing, and service. And that design then may include calculations, which may include a design based on a standard or other suitable documents. Most of the time the guys go and they quote EN standards, or they use bases of calculation for their designs, Australian, New Zealand standards, or you could say that you have got a history of, let's use a simple example. If one had to go to a factory or a manufacturing plant, and there's one in Joburg, there's one in Cape Town, there's one in Durban, and they're now planning on putting one up in PE, they would use that data, or that the numbers that they've, or the calculations that were used on those ones, if they're successful and they're up and running and they have been for 10 years, they would gladly slip that data into their current design to make you understand that it's worked before and it has been working for a while, so they're not concerned about their design, or they base it on the fact that it has been successful over a period of time. Then we run to 10252.1 of 2018. You'll see that when you get to 7.8.11, you'll see that any fire installation or combined installation shall be the subject of a rational design. So you there's about 10 or 15 pages that you can skip, and right at the end of it all they tell you that there's a rational design required for any fire installation or combined, being domestic, potable and fire installation. 10252 part 2 of 1993 says that if the drainage system is the subject of a rational design calculation, the following formula acceptable to calculate. So that would be as far as the hydraulics are concerned, not access, not length of pipe under the building that you can't get to. It is simply, if you look at these here, the following formula: normal flow and continuous flow, sometimes full. These are all hydraulic related, but a rational design calculation can be accepted by the local authority. 10254, where some of the provisions of the standard cannot be applied, the installation complied with the details in a rational design developed by a professional engineer on acceptable installation drawings, and that rational design shall not compromise the safety and performance principles incorporated in the standard. So 10254, you have got the option of a rational design, subject to that it does not compromise safety. 10106, the whole theory behind the collectors before an installation: an assessment of the roof structure that will support the system and its related loads shall be carried out by a competent person. And then if there's a problem deemed to satisfy designs in Annex B, which gives you those little roof truss details with the necessary supports in it, are limited up to and including 250 litre systems. Larger systems will require a design assessment by a competent person. So having looked at all of those standards, and they give you the option of actually getting a competent person in there to do your bidding for you, the reasoning that went through, or the process that we went through, was the following. The standards do allow for competent persons to do rational designs on complete systems and components of systems, as you saw now. However, these must fulfill the functional requirements of the actual regulation. The National Building Regulation is clear that only the competent person may sign off on his own rational design. Very important. The law covers, or let's put it this way, the application or the submission that the competent person does to the local authority includes a proof of PI cover. I saw one yesterday where the engineers got PI cover up to 20 million rand per claim. So if he does a design and something goes wrong and they need to redo, or they need to fix up, or they need to break a building down to get it sorted, he's got 20 million rand per claim that would cover that. I don't know of any plumbers, myself included, that have got that type of PI cover. So it's very important that only the competent person may sign off on his own rational design. However, should a plumber be required to issue a COC for other purposes, in other words, for the whole job, or the local authority wants a COC for the plumbing in the building, in the event that some part of the rational design is not in conformance with the regulation, such as specs, materials, the plumber should have given written notice to the responsible person or principal for that site of such non-compliances. If this had been done, and he has retained proof of these notices, he has indemnified himself and may issue the COC that certifies. And take note, guys, this is basically lining up with what we're doing with SANS 10254 at the moment. That COC certifies that the workmanship, in other words, what you've done, and the notices issued complies with the regulation. The standard says that if you cannot comply, you need to notify in writing the owner. So if you have done that, then that means that you certifying your workmanship and the notice that you've issued to say that these things are non-compliant, and they might not necessarily be outright non-compliant, but there are issues in this design, and you'll still do it. So you don't walk away from the job saying that I'd rather lose this job than do it, but you need to have notice issued to these people that says that your workmanship and then your notice is then actually compliant. The consequence of non-compliance, if the written notice, it could be an email, letters, minutes of site meetings, anything like that, or of non-compliance have not been issued, and you issue a COC stating that his work is compliant with the regulations and standards, he may be legally liable for damages and rectifications. It may also result in invalidation of warranties, exposing him to further claims. So as you can see, the main gist or the main thread throughout this whole thing is that you have to have proof that you've actually notified the owner or his principal agent, be it the architect or the engineer, on site, that there is a clash, and once it's been minuted and you've notified them and they've not rectified it, then like the previous slide says, you're responsible for what you do. So the resolution that was taken is that the plumber is obliged to give written notice of points where the regulations have not been complied with in a rational design, spec of material, etc., to the responsible person. It is therefore the resolution that the plumber has complied with the requirements of notifying the owner or his appointed agents of the non-compliance prior to signing the COC. He cannot be held responsible for work done as instructed. The COC certifies that the workmanship and the notices given are in compliance with the regulations and mandatory standards. It does not certify that that installation then suddenly becomes compliant. I hope that clarifies that matter. Have we got any questions?
All right, Minia, we do have a couple questions here. I'm going to get right into it. The first question reads, how involved with the development need to have these documentations and inspections?
Sorry, just run that by me again.
All right, I'm going to read it again. How involved with this development need to have these documentation and inspections?
I'm not clear on that question. How involved?
All right, so I'm going to move on to the next one.
Okay.
All right. The next question reads, if a drainage or sewer goes under a building, what is the size of the concrete encasement needed? I have had various sizes issues.
Okay. As far as encasement of drainage goes, I think that most local authorities gave up on that when we started getting proper UPVC drainage pipe. If you cast your mind back, the encasement of pipe was around earthenware pipes and fiber cement, well, used to be asbestos, something that was brittle or something that could break under the building. By encasing a PVC pipe, you're actually doing more harm than good, because you'll find that with a bit of flexibility on that PVC, there's nothing that can happen to that pipe under the building other than a bit of lateral movement or a bit of movement sideways. Once you've encased it, you've basically given up on that option. Most guys just end up doing a thickening of the foundation, or they actually put a what they call a relieving arch or something over where the foundation is. So you'll find that it is in most cases they just do a protective thing around where the foundations is to not point load the pipe, but concrete around a PVC pipe under a building, you'll find that it actually serves no purpose.
All right, and then I have not yet gotten clarification on that on the first question, so
Okay.
I will follow up with that via email, and then I'll send you the question then. But then
Okay.
we've got no questions this morning. Mineo, would you like to end off?
Yeah, no problem. Guys, thanks for attending. Same time, same place next week. And then we'll touch on the next subject, or we'll get to the next point that was raised there. I think there's about 10 or 12 of them that we're going to go through. So if there's any other queries, we are having a meeting tomorrow. So we'll be formalizing on where the guys can submit any of their current questions or the hassles that they do have on site, or the issues, or if there's any ambiguity in the standards that they're battling with, or there's any discrepancies or whatever, then we'll find out whether we need to open up a portal somewhere, or we can get a mail sent to somewhere. So by next week, I'll be able to give you feedback on how we're going to deal with these questions. So until then, enjoy the rest of the week and the weekend. We'll chat again next week.
All right, perfect. I have just received clarification on that first question.
Sure.
It reads, if you get to a development, where will the copies of these documents be? Or sorry, will there be copies of these documents?
There should be, especially nowadays with the solars and the heat pumps and all these things, the developer would have, or should have, a copy of his own. But then when you hand over site, or when you actually hand it over to the body corporate or the tenant, or not the tenants, the owners of these buildings, they should have copies of all the manuals and all the other documentation on site. If not, then most of the time these documents get handed to the local authority when they sign off those buildings, or they need copies of those buildings. So between the original developer and the actual owner of the building, or the local authority, someone must have a copy of that. Most importantly, if there's any doubt, I'm sure if you approach the plumber that worked there and he made sure that he did his homework and noticed or gave these people notification, he most likely would keep copies for the next 10 or 15 or whatever years that his company is still around. So you could touch base with any of those 4 people, but there should be, or let's put it this, there must be written confirmation of that somewhere between those 4 people.